introduction for them. Welcome again, another edition of Bob the Father. Thanks for coming on this kind of nice night. I mean, it's kind of been a gorgeous day today. So I was kind of wondering how many people would come with Thanksgiving and everything else. But last week I was here alone for about 15 minutes. Like, yeah, well, let's call it. It worked out. So yeah, this again is like an open forum. So it's really kind of open to any questions may have about anything, any topic, anything from the faith or anything personally about your parish priest. Well, more your one parish priest who's here. I can't answer for any other parish priest. So I'll open the floor. Who has a question, feel free.
Well, I want to know, you talked about the communion a couple weeks ago, about a month ago, that you were finding it in different areas, in different places.
Oh, you mean the host?
The host.
Yes.
Okay. What I wanted to know is Sister Pat came in yesterday, and she said that they asked her if she would give communion to the people at Sherbrooke.
Mm-hmm.
And she says that when she went there, she said she asked, or her sister got asked, where's the list of Catholics?
Mm-hmm.
And they said they were giving communion to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, what happens when they give a host to a person that's not? Because she said this is that's not, they're not supposed to be doing that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so here's the thing. What the church has actually always taught, and this has not necessarily been. I think there's more of a more strict interpretation when it comes to this thing. So the thought was like only Catholics should receive the Eucharist. What the actual official teaching of the church has always been is that when we talk about a sacrament, there's always matter of the form, the minister and the recipient. And so the matter has to be valid, the form has to be said correctly, the minister has to be valid, and the recipient has to be valid in order for the sacrament to come about. So when we're talking about this particular aspect, we're talking about who is a valid recipient of the sacrament of the Eucharist, right? So as long as it's unleavened wheat bread, grape wine, there's either a priest, or validly ordained priest or bishop that's saying the words, "This is my body, this is the chalice of my blood," and the recipient has to be valid too. So what does that mean? Well, first off, they have to be baptized. That is non-negotiable. So could a non-baptized person receive the Eucharist? They can physically receive it into their bodies, but it has no effect because that person is not baptized. Okay. Secondly, they have to believe what the church professes about the Eucharist. And primarily what they have to believe is that it is truly the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ that is consecrated at the hands of a validly ordained priest or bishop. That's fundamental. That is it, right? So it's a Protestant could believe that. Okay. The third aspect is someone has to be in a state of grace to validly receive the Eucharist. Now, this is kind of a point where it can be kind of tricky. Because what do we mean by someone who's in a state of grace?
Free of mortal sin.
They have no mortal sin on their soul. And what we teach as a church, what that means is, for someone to have a mortal sin in their soul, they have to do a objectively bad thing, know fully that it's bad, and do it anyway. So based on that criteria, mortal sin is somewhat subjective to the person's own conscience. And so if they have, let's say, a malformed conscience, well, they wouldn't necessarily be committing mortal sin. And so it's very possible that someone that's non-Catholic can meet all three of those criteria and receive the Eucharist validly.
And you said baptized, so it doesn't mean that they were baptized Catholic?
Correct. They can be baptized. We understand there's one baptism, whether you're Anglican or Lutheran or Baptist or whatever, as long as you're baptized in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, good. We do not rebaptize you if you convert to Catholicism or at all, because you are baptized. You are a member of the church, you are a child of God, praise God. It's usually the last 2 points are kind of the sticking points. But, for instance, maybe you have a very devout Lutheran who would actually share the same opinion, understanding of the Eucharist as we do as Catholics. And it's very possible they may not be in a state of mortal sin. Could they receive? Yeah. Technically, they could.
Hmm.
So it's kind of that's the thing. There's this kind of theological maxim that, well, I mean, it's certainly not a thought. It's more of a general maxim that ignorance is bliss. Right. So we're called as Catholics through the grace of receiving confirmation to grow in our understanding of the moral and the spiritual life. And as we grow, we become more aware of our own sin. Right.
Mhm.
Which means, praise God, we can confess them and be freed of them and grow from them, right? Grow and overcome them. But someone who maybe isn't at that state and maybe is stuck in their own ignorance or stuck in their lack of understanding, they wouldn't necessarily be considered mortal sin, even grave sin like a murder or theft. So there is objective morality, we'd say that's wrong. But when it comes to sinfulness, that is always subjective enough to the individual conscience. And so what that would mean is something that may be sinful for me may not be sinful for the other person because I don't know what they know. Maybe they're being compelled in some way to do this, in which case that's not a sin on them. And that's kind of where it gets kind of tricky, right? That's a little bit different than like someone who proclaims to be Catholic and upholds things that are contrary to the Catholic faith. So we see this in our Catholic politicians. There's a big controversy right now about Catholic politicians, and really, in reality, those that uphold hold opinions or hold even promote certain things that are against Catholic teaching, they should receive the Eucharist.
I agree.
Right?
Could you make
Well, I
some-
think they make a mockery of our religion. Because they keep saying they're Catholic and all of a sudden they're receiving the communion.
Well, and see, that's where it becomes even more difficult because is it possible these Catholic politicians are in the same boat as some of our other friends who don't necessarily know and don't have a full knowledge of what I think the charitable assumption is that's the case. So let's say, and I don't want to call names, but let's say we have a very prominent Catholic politician who has a lot of authority, yet maybe they're in a diminished mental capacity. Because of that state of mental capacity, even though they may say things that are contrary to the faith, or even promote things that are contrary to the faith, are they actually giving full consent and full deliberation? That's tough, right? I can't say that for sure. And so if they would present themselves for communion, I would have to charitably assume, okay, I may have an obligation, but I would have to charitably assume that they would be in the state of grace. Unless I had knowledge, like actual sensual knowledge that they weren't. So yeah, so that's all that to say is that, yeah, there's criteria to be a valid recipient, but part of that criteria is not, you don't have to be Catholic. And we see that also more maybe particularly with our Orthodox brothers and sisters, right? That we fully encourage our Orthodox brothers and sisters to receive the Eucharist here when they present themselves. And we also say that Catholics are free to receive the Eucharist in the Orthodox Church because it is Jesus.
Mhm.
We would say, though, one may want to refrain because, well, we want to also respect the traditions of our sister churches and the Eastern churches. And so they may not want you to present yourself. And that's kind of where the sticking point would come to for that.
How many different denominations of priests are there?
Well, okay, what do you mean by there's only one priesthood?
Okay,
If you're
wait a
asking,
minute, you
if
just,
you're asking how many rites there are in the
Yeah.
Catholic Church, or also how many
no, I mean,
Orthodox churches there may be?
because I never realized that I knew there was Benedictine, but now there's St. Joseph and there's St. Andrews. And
See, you gotta be very clear about that, Mickey, because are you talking about different religious orders?
yeah,
Or are you talking about rites, like different RITESs?
well, what's the RITES?
Okay, so RITES would be like, let's say you have a Maronite priest,
Mhm.
or a Ukrainian rite priest, or a Melkite priest, or Chaldean. So we have these different RITESs within the Catholic Church,
Mhm.
as well as RITESs that are not in union with Rome. But they still have the same belief and moral understanding, which would unite them with the Catholic Church.
So is their leader still the Pope?
The ones that are in line with Rome, yes,
Oh,
but
okay.
there are the Orthodox churches don't recognize. Well, and see, even that is kind of difficult because for, let's say, 900 years, 950 years, the thought was that the Orthodox don't recognize the Pope.
Are we talking Greek Orthodox or?
We're talking about any Orthodox, so Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox,
There's a lot of them
Ukrainian
I didn't know.
Orthodox. For every Orthodox, here's something to keep in mind too, for every Orthodox church that exists, there's a corresponding Catholic church.
And what's the Orthodox mean then? What is Orthodox?
So the Orthodox, okay, boy, this is more of a history lesson. So in 1090, 92, for instance. Well, and this really started even back to like the 5th century. There was these different understandings between the Greek and the West and Rome. So it kind of started with the division of the Roman Empire. That at a certain point in the 4th century, the Emperor of Rome moved the capital from Rome to Constantinople. And so because of that political movement, there was a thought that Constantinople had a lot of authority to maintain doctrine and promote certain things, right? Now that was never really the case. Even the Constantinople would recognize that they wouldn't do anything without an ecumenical council. And an ecumenical council would not be an ecumenical council without the presence of the Pope. So, all right, fine, whatever. But there was this development of understanding because of this movement politically, that the Patriarch of Constantinople had a lot more authority than he might have thought. And so because of that, there was these different type of issues that were popping up all throughout the centuries. One of which was what was called the iconoclast controversy. So in the Eastern Church, there was kind of this movement that really started even back in the 2nd and 3rd century, with this destruction of these images of anything sacred. Because it was kind of thought that that was breaking the first commandment. Well, hey, we're worshiping these idols, and we shouldn't do that, right? And part of that's because a lot of the first images of the deity and also of these different saints were based on Greek and Roman gods, right? So an artist was like, well, I got this picture of Zeus. I'm going to take that as my inspiration to do this statue of Jesus. Okay, well, you know, fine. Over time, though, this kind of came to a head. And especially in Constantinople in the East, they started destroying all these statues and icons and imagery and became very simplistic. So this took a head up to about 787. There was a council that was called. They decided, you know what, you're not, okay, yeah, use of these images are good for devotion. They can elevate our minds and our hearts to something above ourselves. But also, if we keep in mind that you're not worshiping the thing, you're worshiping or venerating what the thing is depicting, right? So we don't worship a statue, we don't worship a crucifix. We worship the person that the crucifix represents, right? So there's kind of a clear distinction in that. But even that still kind of persisted up until about really the 10th century. And so finally there was some clarity, but eventually there was this issue that kind of broke the camel's back between the East and the West. And it came down to the use of the actual words in the creed. And what was added to the creed after the Council of Constantinople, after the Council of Nicaea, by the Western Church was the use of the word filioque. Does anyone know what the word filioque means? Well, anytime you have a que after a word, it means also, right? So filius means son, que also the son. So it comes in, we're speaking to creed about the procession of the Holy Spirit from the Father and the Son, right? So the Greeks had this understanding that the Father, then the Son processes from the Father, and the Holy Spirit processes from the Son. Okay. What we say in our creed is the Holy Spirit processes from the Father and the Son. What's the difference? Well, there's more of a linear approach to the Greek, while we understand that the Father and Son is trying to signify this unity of the Trinity in their divinity. Who's right? Both and. It really doesn't make any difference. It's still a recognition of the one Trinity. But for 1,000 years, there was this great, and there was this level of excommunication between the two churches that set up this Eastern Church and the Western Church. They still had valid sacraments, had valid holy orders, had valid bishops, had everything that the church teaches, yet this is break with the head of the church, who was the Pope. And for almost 1,000 years, there was no communication between the two. Because, well, they're wrong, we're right, or we're right, they're wrong. Vatican II happens, there's more of an openness to kind of start dialogue. And because of that, there is actually a hope for unification. To the point where actually it was thought within this century that we would be unified. And that was going well up until about 2008. Does anyone know what happened in 2008?
Something to do with the Pope?
Actually, it had nothing to do with the Pope. So what happened was, when we were in these dialogues with the Eastern churches, we were dialoguing with the patriarch of the Greek Orthodox Church, who was in Constantinople. And they were all the Orthodox Church were unified under him to have this dialogue. Until the Russians decided, nope, Constantinople is not the new Rome, Moscow is the new Rome, and we should be the ones that head this all up. So Constantinople and Russia and Moscow split. And now the problem is, well, who do we talk to? Because if we talk to the Russian Orthodox Patriarch, we're going to alienate the Greek Orthodox. And if we talk to the Greek Orthodox, we're going to alienate the Russian Orthodox. So what we're trying to promote right now is unification of the Greek and the Moscow, so we can actually regain dialogue. One of the fruits of these things, though, these dialogues have come about that we have actually an understanding. A lot of the issues have come from more translation of language than really theological differences. And even the understanding of the Pope from the Greek Orthodox is still there. They recognize the authority of the Holy Father. They wouldn't necessarily say that he is maybe, well, I don't know. I mean, maybe certain titles they would say wouldn't apply to him. But then again, the Eastern churches and the Catholic Church are run by synodally. They're run by their own bishops. And even there's an understanding, well, we recognize the Pope as who's our champion, our center of teaching and faith and morals, but he also doesn't have autonomy outside of his own diocese. So there's a better understanding now of what we're actually saying to each other. And that's why there was great hope that we unify. But the split politically between Moscow and the Greeks.
Well, does the Orthodox churches today, I thought the big deal was that they refused to recognize the authority of the Pope, the absolute authority.
That is not really an issue, because if the Eastern churches within the Catholic Church would also have the same opinion of the Pope, that he's the first among equals, right? And in reality, that's kind of true. We understand the same thing, that the Pope, he can make infallible statements. And even the Greeks will recognize that even in ecumenical council, it doesn't become a teaching until the Pope promulgates it. That's his authority. The difference would be, though, is governing, right? So there's maybe a misunderstanding of, well, how does the Pope govern? Can he just come in wherever he wants and then start running things? And the answer to that has always been no. The Holy Father can't come here to St. Louis and tell Archbishop Rzansky, I think you need to suppress this parish and build a new one here. And that Father Madden guy, you got to get rid of him, put him somewhere else. He can't do that. Only Archbishop Rzansky can do that. Right? So there's a better understanding about that, but this doesn't contradict anything that the Catholic Church or the Orthodox Church actually teaches about.
Well, do they believe that, as I think we believe, the Pope is the successor to Peter, right?
They believe that,
You
yeah.
like there's a linear line from Peter to whoever was the second pope.
No,
number three.
they believe that. They believe in the successor of Peter, sure. Now, what the issue more is ecclesiologically, if still study the church, how does his authority to govern come into play? Because the Eastern Orthodox churches are founded by the apostles too. Maybe not Peter, but apostles like Thomas and James and Jude. So, okay, they still have apostolic succession. The kind of the main difference though is the understanding of how the church is governed, right? But what we teach is nothing that contradicts what the Eastern Orthodox believe. The bishop has a lot of autonomy within a region. All the Pope is doing is maintaining the church teaching as a central teaching authority. And his job is to be a custodian of those teachings. So good. The problem now is, well, hey, Russia and Greeks, let's get together so we can actually continue our dialogues and maybe we can be unified.
You know, the churches look really different though.
Yeah, well, so but here's the thing though, if you were to go to, so we have a Latin Rite church, right? That's what most of us have an experience with. If you were to, but we also have a Ukrainian Rite church that's actually down in South County. And if you were to go to your Ukrainian Catholic church, Ukrainian Orthodox church, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. But the one's Catholic, the other one's not. And for every Orthodox church, there's a corresponding Catholic one. That if you even in the celebration of what we call the Divine Liturgy, you know, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between the two. If you went to a Byzantine Mass or Greek Orthodox divine worship, you won't be able to tell the difference.
I've never been to one.
Well, I think it also shows the beauty that we have and the richness we have in our Catholic faith, that we truly are universal. Right? As a matter of fact, this morning I was on the radio today. I was listening to Cardinal Dolan. He was interviewing the newest eparchate for the Melkite Church here in the United States. So he has two cathedrals, one in Hollywood, one in Boston. He's Catholic, but their liturgy is based in the Greek, while our liturgy is based in Latin. Same structures. So you saw the liturgy of the Word, liturgy of the Eucharist. No matter where you go, you're going to find that, even in the Orthodox Church. But it's just different in kind. It's not different kind, just kind of different in flavor, in culture. Good. I think we have, I know the Maronites now are at Elizabeth of Hungary. So you can go there, and I don't know if the Byzantines are still having they used to have their divine liturgy at the basement of the Blessed John 23rd, Old St. Mark. I'm not sure if they're still there or not though. They may have moved since they closed that town.
Oh, the one that used to be the Benedictine.
Right. Yeah.
It's closed.
But they're not having the divine worship there anymore for the Byzantines.
Well, the Church of the Nazarene supposedly bought it,
Okay.
but now I heard that the Church, the Journey bought it, which is that.
Well, that's funny because nothing's been actually. Nothing's come to the priests about that. As
No.
far as we know, it's sold by the archdiocese.
Yeah, and what happened was that the church, when it changed, the county is making them do all kinds of stuff. Because at first they opened a nursery and everything, had all bunch of kids
yeah.
going and everything. Then the next thing you know, they're all gone. That's
Yeah.
only about 2 blocks away from my house. That's why I know that.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
And now, it's just, you see the lights on once in a while and then you see the lights off, so. who
Yeah, like I
knows?
said, they used to in the basement there. Used to have the Byzantine Rite massive divine. Divine. They call it divine liturgy because it only happens for the Eastern churches. They only have mass on Sundays, and part of that's because their priests can marry, and to maintain level of purity, the priests. This goes back to Levitical rules. You have to actually be continent for 24 hours. before you actually offer the sacrifice of the mass. So that rule applies to not only, those any Eastern Rite priest that actually is married. It's hard to do more with the Roman Rite, so like Father Rainier, for instance, he's got a wife and 6 kids, well, I don't know what the rule is for him, that has to be dependent on the individual. But I don't know if he has to maintain some amount of continence before he celebrates mass. I don't know, that's not my business. Rather than I get into it, so I don't really know for sure. So yeah, but that usually that kind of applies in certain ways with married priests.
Wasn't that before the 12th century that the priest could get married? And then all.
In the Roman Rite,
Well, they changed it somewhere along the line that meant.
it was actually relatively early on. And as a matter of fact, if you look back to even the early ecumenical councils like Nicaea and Constantinople, the first thing they kind of tackle is priestly celibacy. And in the Roman Church, the Roman Rite, they've always promoted that
Mhm.
from the very early on. Eastern churches, different culture, different understanding, so they did allow.
So they do marry.
They can,
Oh, okay.
but even in the Eastern rites, you cannot become a bishop if you're married,
No.
right? So yeah, the Melkites, the Byzantines, all those guys can marry before they get ordained. They can't be ordained then and get married, and that same applies for the Roman rite. So like a permanent deacons, for instance, you can't be, if you're a permanent deacon, if you're not married before you're ordained and then you become ordained, you can't get married. But if you're married before you're ordained, you can stay married to that person. And if that person were to die, you can't remarry.
Wow.
So that's kind of the stipulations. So yeah, all that to say, valid recipients should be that way. But if you're talking about orders, I mean, there's like new orders popping up all the time. So to say like how many different orders are out there, I mean, you have traditional ones like the Benedictines, you have, as a matter of fact, the first order was actually started by Martin de Tours.
Mhm.
This is the 4th century. So he even has an order still today. Franciscans, the Jesuits, the Dominicans, most of the main orders are kind of offshoots of those.
Mhm.
So you have like other orders that kind of branch off from them. But there's always some popping up and kind of based off what the need of the particular region, state, whatever's going on, the Holy Spirit develops orders to fulfill a particular charism that's necessary.
Yeah.
Right.
Same way with orders of nuns. Right?
Yes, of course. Yeah. Any religious order they'll pop, there's a particular charism. And that's a little different. So like for someone who may be discerning their vocation, that's one thing they would have to discern first. So first, it's not necessarily am I called to this order, am I called to this charism? And then it's okay, which orders actually, provide that charism, that service? Okay, these do. Okay, now which order am I being called to within this charism? And then when I'm actually in the order, now what am I being called to within the order? Right?
Give an example of it.
So let's say I was an 18-year-old or 17-year-old kid who just graduated high school and I'm being called to religious life. Let's say I'm a woman, for instance. Okay. I'm not, let's just say. So let's just be clear. So let's say I'm being called, okay, I feel this dedication to teach. I really want to teach. Now I can do that as a layperson, sure, but I think I'm also being called to religious life. Okay, what orders are actually dedicated just to teaching? And that's the key. Because an order is dedicated to a particular service or charism. Not multiple, one. Okay, well, we have the National Dominicans, they're pretty dedicated to teaching. The School System Notre Dame, they're kind of dedicated to teaching. Okay. All right, well, or I don't know, maybe, well, it used to be the Crownlet Sisters of St. Joseph, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, but that's what they were founded to do, right? Okay. Well, let's see, this order here, they're not doing that anymore. Okay, I don't think I want to go there, right? The Notre Dame Sisters, okay, they're doing that still. The National Dominicans, okay, they're also doing that. All right. Then I would start go visiting these orders and say, okay, what's your life like? How do you live? And then I would talk to my spiritual director, and I would pray, and I'd talk to my spiritual director again, I would pray, and I would say, okay, I think I'm called to the National Dominicans. I'm gonna start discerning with them, so I go live with them. And over a certain period of time, I grow in my discernment, and I'm still being called to this, and I keep on going further and further into the program. And eventually it gets to the point where I can take my first vows, and these are temporary vows. That I'm dedicating my life in some way to this particular charism. Okay. Further discernment, further talking to scripture director, further growing my life here with these group of women. And eventually it gets to the point where like, okay, I'm being called to actually join this order. Okay, good. And I take my final vows, and I'm not a part of that order. And now I'm actually at the whim of my superior to send me where she wants to send me. Okay, but I'm doing this order, it doesn't matter, because I'm doing this charism, I'm doing what I'm called to do. So I'm trusting the Holy Spirit's gonna guide my superior to put me where I need to be to fulfill that charism. Now, within that order too, there may be two different types. There may be, okay, you have a charism, but also we have maybe what we call either scouts or even like cloistered portion of this order. So even within that, maybe I'm called to pray for the ministry and not actually do it. And saw them in the order, now what I'm being called to do, am I called to do cloister issue or that? So that's kind of the options you would have in that. But a lot of that's determined for you. Because once you become part of the order, the superior makes that call for you.
What would be a charism for a
Same, I mean, you could talk about teaching, you could talk about maybe the medical field, you could talk about any kind of career you would see out in the world. Or the same would apply for them, cloister. They haven't called to actually live a life in community and pray for the good of the world or the good of this charism that we're serving people. Sure. Now, in that respect, am I being called to be just a brother? Am I called to be a monk? Am I called to be a priest? That comes after I join the order. So once I take vows in the order, then I can discern, okay, what am I being called to do within the order? Same for a woman though. Am I called to be a sister or nun? Am I being called part of the lay order? The point is I'm being called to the order first, then I can discern what I'm being called to do within that order. Now for like an archscouts and priests, it's different. I'm being called to priesthood. Good.
So like Mother Teresa, right, it was ministering to the poor.
Right.
And she ended up starting her own.
Yeah, so she was a
order.
sister of Loretto,
Mhm.
right? She was a Loretto sister, which also is a teaching order. And her experience in India, well, I don't know if she was on a retreat or she was there to do some kind of service, but I think she was teaching. And she saw this kind of need. And so she went back to her superiors, said, I think I'm being called to do this. Can I? And they said, sure. There you go. But she had to start her own order because it was a different charism.
I have a great nephew who is living with an order of, I don't know what order it is, but it's in Detroit.
Okay.
College led, this year he's spending a whole year with them.
Yeah.
To see if it's what he wants to.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. That's wise. I mean, most orders have kind of this program where they call it either it's the apostolacy. So, but even before that, a lot of actually have now for these kind of discernment years where you can kind of spend some time with them and just live there, not make any commitment, and just see if that's actually what we're being called to do. We actually have that in the archdiocese too. We call it the Colby House. So especially for guys who are older. What's kind of funny is like I was one of the first people to go in the Colby House when he got resurrected, and I was there with two other guys, and all of us got ordained. Right? But it was a time just like discernment, like, okay, am I being called to this? Also, too, the benefit is it kind of helps guys to work off some debt if they have it.
Mhm.
But it's kind of twofold. But yeah, most orders kind of do that. I think it's just wise to do is say, like, are you really being called this lifestyle? And after a year, you should probably know that.
Yeah.
Then you can maybe start go in the apostolacy, then the novitiates, then take first vows, etc.
How long does that take?
It depends on the order. So some maybe 6, 7 years. A Jesuit, it could be sometime somewhere between 11 and 13.
Really?
Mhm.
Get your doctorate.
You have to be a
degree.
doctorate. It depends on what
You have to have a doctorate
you
degree?
have to, the word of a Jesuit, you have to have a doctorate. You have to be a priest, you have to have a doctorate though. Even the brothers have to have doctorates.
Wow.
Yeah. What's kind of funny about the Jesuits though, is you can be ordained a priest before actually they take your final vows as a Jesuit. They're a very silly order. They're very odd. I don't know this. I just, only order to be suppressed in the modern world. So I'm saying, I'm not just gonna put that. But yeah, but I love Jesuits. They're good people. But yeah, it depends because different orders have different requirements and depends on, well, like, especially for certain charisms, like for teaching or for like medical fields, you have to get degrees for that and you have to go and get the degrees. So it kind of depends.
Better like to study.
I mean, that's kind of the same for anything you're gonna get involved with the church. I mean, part of that is, I mean, so most orders have what they call a scholastic period where that's all you're doing, you're going to school. Right?
Well, I think it's amazing how much you remember of what you learned. I mean, people ask you a question and you know the answer.
I attribute that to the good staff we have at Kenrick. We have a wonderful faculty at Kenrick. People that are dedicated to that craft. And I mean, it's almost like being in order in some ways. I mean, you have these men and women, lay and even the priests that are dedicated to make sure that the next generation of priests know what the hell they're talking about. And I think that's the same for any of us that have come from that institution. I don't think we really, it's almost like, I kind of put it this way. You don't really appreciate the cathedral until you go somewhere else. I think we don't necessarily appreciate the seminary because, or you don't really know what we have until you see other seminaries. We are so fortunate, like even when it comes to like the sexual abuse crisis, and everything else, we were kind of blessed in that like there was a level of orthodoxy that was still present and being taught. And that can only come from an act of the Holy Spirit. So I really do think that the people, the staff and faculty we have there are phenomenal. And they help you to realize it. And I think part of that too is, I will have to say, I think if I were to go through the seminary when I was younger, like going like out of high school, I don't think I would have retained as much. And part of that's because I think it's kind of a struggle some of my younger brothers have going to the seminary. They're so kind of more focused on getting the grade. Because it is a school. I mean, you're trying to get grade. I mean, you're trying to get ahead. I get that too. I think one of the graces I had in being more mature when I entered, was I wasn't so much concerned about the grade. I was really more concerned about what am I learning in this class. And what I found was, I think this just comes from wisdom, that if you were focused on that, the grade comes anyway. Right. I will say, I thought academically, it was much more challenging at Rolla. But also it's hard because it's just different in kind, right? I mean, I didn't have to write a lot of papers at Rolla. Most of my homework was doing equations for hours on end. And studying for the test to make sure I had the right skills and could apply the certain equations and things to the proper context to actually get a good, not even a good answer, just do it the right way, which is a struggle in itself. Whereas in theology and philosophy, I think it was more of a challenge, but you're just doing something completely different. I mean, it's associated because one governs the other in many ways. I mean, that's kind of the thing that I thought was very interesting being an engineer, was I could kind of see the stuff I learned in Rolla and in my former life flowed from what I was learning in theology and philosophy. And I mean, there's certain things I kind of wish I would have taken in the seminary before I actually took some of the classes at Rolla, because I think it would have helped me kind of just work my thoughts and figure out things in that way. But yeah, it's hard to compare, but I mean, I don't know. I think part of that too is because of the maturity level. I was less mature at Rolla than I was when I was in the seminary. So it's a difficult analysis. It's not necessarily apples to apples.
Well, your job is to remember all that.
Yeah, but also too, I mean, I think also, just like anything else, when you put it into practice, it's easier to retain. I mean, so. I think that was one of the worries that a lot of us have coming out of the seminary. It's like, oh man, what am I gonna do with it? I mean, how do I remember all this? And then it's what's fascinating, you tend to find very quickly ways you apply the stuff you learn. And primarily that's through like sacraments and these kind of things, and like, spiritual direction, those kind of things, confession. That's where I think where the rubber hits the road. You say, oh yeah, that's what I learned, and so I can apply this to the situation because I think this would apply. God does provide. Plus, I mean, you're also always working on homilies, you're applying those things. It's like any type of exercise. If you don't use it, you'll lose it.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Good.
How about the archangels? How come we refer to them all as saints? I did some research ahead of time and,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
understand, I guess, at the surface why that is, but, I don't know if it
Okay,
makes total
what,
sense.
so why on the surface would that be?
Well, all saints are assumed to be in heaven,
Yes,
and they're holy in their right.
correct.
And there have been, days named after all of them, feast of,
Right.
Saint Michael the Archangel, all this. So, okay.
Okay.
It's fine.
Yeah,
But, and, they're not canonized like a person would be and go through the whole, veneration
right.
process.
Mostly because they wouldn't have to.
Wouldn't have to, they don't have a body.
Right. And plus they would, okay, so when we talk about the archangels particularly, their very presence is miraculous in some ways. So the fact that they did what they did is a miraculous act.
Mhm.
And so Raphael, Gabriel, Michael, they're actually not only in the Old Testament, New Testament, also in the Old Testament, very clearly named. So we would say that anyone that's with God in heaven is a saint, or I should say, any rational soul that's with God in heaven is a saint. And so, of course, angels are rational souls. They actually have, in the degree of being, they would be higher than we because of the intellect they have. So they would be, if they're with God, they're saints, right? Fallen angels, no, but the ones that retain, yeah, sure. So maybe it might be, we call them saints because they're with God in heaven. You're right, they don't have bodies, they don't have the same souls we do, but they would be defined as saints because they are with God in heaven.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah. Now, we're told there actually are 7 archangels. We only know 3.
Who says there's 7?
Oh, the Bible.
Okay.
Scripture calls out 7. I think I don't know if that's from the book of Daniel, maybe even early as like Exodus, can't remember, or Genesis. I can't remember the exact chapter verse, but I can find that if you want it.
But it doesn't name them, it just says there's.
It does name, actually the naming of those comes later. So Raphael is actually named in the book of Tobit. Michael is named in Daniel first. And then Gabriel doesn't come out till the Gospels. Right?
Really?
Yeah.
Is he first mentioned in the Annunciation? Is that what we call it?
Annunciation, the first time we see, well, actually before that, we see him at the proclamation of the coming of John the Baptist. So Zechariah, John the Baptist's father, and this is in Luke 1. He's offering the sacrifice in the temple because he's in the Holy of Holies, and only one priest throughout the year is allowed to go to the Holy of Holies. And so he's in there offering the incense sacrifice, which is a sacrifice you only give to God, right? Gabriel appears to him and says, "You're going to have a child in here." And so he's like, "What? How?" And so then Gabriel strikes him dumb because you're doubting me, so you're going to be dumb. Sorry, you can't talk, right? Yeah.
They go on that one.
And so the next time we see Gabriel, he appears to Mary at the Annunciation.
Is there ever a gospel of, I don't know that I've ever read it, of Gabriel appearing to see? Is that gospel that we would?
Zechariah.
Zechariah,
It's in the Gospel, it's Luke chapter 1.
but I mean, where is it in, when we have mass, is it, have I ever heard it in church?
Yeah,
I'm gonna go look, I mean, I'm gonna go read it.
I want to say it might be coming up in the next week or two. I mean, I think it's part of the,
But
it is, it's part of the infant narratives, but like, it's really early on. But it does come up within the Advent.
Hmm.
I'm not sure if it's Sunday, but it does come up in the Advent
And I
cycle.
guess if it's not Sunday.
Yeah, I don't know if it comes up Sunday. I gotta check that out. But it does come up within the Advent, on at least one of the daily masses. But I think it's interesting. I asked my fifth graders about this, I had class with them last week. We were actually going through the prayers, these different canticles. So Zechariah has a canticle as soon as he can open his mouth. Mary has a canticle and she says yes to the Gabriel. And I'm sure you probably heard the canticle. It's probably said several times, but it's interesting that Zechariah was struck dumb, but Mary was not. Even though they asked a very similar question.
Hmm.
Right, so Zechariah said, well, how can this be? And then Mary said, how can this be? But Zechariah was struck dumb while Mary was not. Do we have any thoughts on that?
Hmm.
Because she's a girl.
Ladies first, right? Chivalry's not that, but Gabriel, he's not a girl or a boy, so what does he care?
I know. Oh, no.
Or maybe he's a girl and a boy. Whatever, however you want to put it. He doesn't have sex because he doesn't have a body.
Is there an answer to that question?
Sure there is.
Okay,
Do we have any thoughts on it though?
Well, Mary is divine,
Well, she's not divine.
all right?
She was given a particular grace, and she was conceived without original sin, but she is very much human. That may be part of it.
Well, she had to answer Gabriel, yes or no, I mean, she had to.
Yeah.
So you're saying that Mary was given a choice and Zechariah was not, and so Zechariah went against the will while Mary didn't?
all he said was, how can this be? He wasn't going against it, was it? He was just surprised.
Yeah. I think the answer to this is it's several. I think part of that is, yeah, because Mary was given that particular grace. That was kind of part of it, but I think also it's actually the answer the question posed. In one way, it's very natural to understand why or how, and the other one is not. So for instance, all throughout the Old Testament, there's always evidence, there's been plenty of evidence of people who are past their childbearing years having kids. I mean, as early as Abraham and Sarah. Now we're told Abraham was 100 and Sarah was 99. Well, were they that old? Maybe. I mean, usually those bigger numbers in the Old Testament kind of signify wisdom. But regardless, they probably would have been older and past childbearing age. The parents of Samson were older. Samuel's parents, Abigail and I can't remember the family name, they were a little bit older, or Hannah, a little bit older. So there's a lot of evidence throughout the Old Testament of babies being born to couples who were past the years of rearing children. So Zechariah's question doesn't make any sense. Because if Zechariah were to engage with his wife, Elizabeth, it's possible they have a child, no matter how old they are. That could happen. Mary's question, though, is different because, well, I have never been with a man, nor am I planning to. So how is this going to happen? Right? That's a completely different question. So it's more about the purpose of the question, where the actual how it's coming about, than the actual question itself. And I think we would say that Zechariah had less reason to doubt than Mary did. Because Mary was still a virgin, was maintained her virginity throughout her entire life.
Is there something in the Bible, because I don't remember, of her she wasn't planning on ever getting married?
Well, I mean, she was married. Let's be very clear. She was married to Joseph.
Right, but I mean,
Right.
before,
Well,
Oh, but she
it's commonly during the time, that this was happening, there was a movement in Judaism called the Essene movement. And the Essenes were a group of, they were Levites, they were priests, that actually maintained celibacy. They would not get married. And from this practice, it kind of flowed to other tribes of Israel, including Judah, of which Joseph and Mary were both part of. And so it was commonly thought that Mary and Joseph, even though they were betrothed, that they were never going to actually consummate or engage in that action. People think maybe that part of that's because of the age difference between Joseph and Mary. We don't really know how different they were in age. You know, Mary was about 14 when she got married. Joseph maybe a little bit older, but maybe not that much older, maybe in his like early 20s. But still, that'd be kind of, you know, different. But it was commonly held that Mary was always going to maintain her virginity. And we hold that today, and that's a teaching of the church that Mary remained a virgin before, during, and after the birth of Jesus. And it makes sense because a pure vessel cannot be defiled by man once God has, you know, sanctified it.
Is it possible that Joseph was a widower? I've heard this story
Yeah.
because you know, there's this one passage in the Bible where they're questioning Jesus, like, who is this guy? You know, and then they say, well, don't we know his mother and father? Don't we
Yeah.
know his brothers and sisters?
Yes.
Which would imply that Jesus had, and I heard one explanation for that was that Joseph was actually a widower.
It's
And
very
yeah.
possible. It's very possible. It's very possible. I mean, there's no definitive teaching on whether Joseph was widow or not. I think what we have to ask though is what gives most glorification to God, and what's the most charitable assumption, and also what's the most reasonable. So is it reasonable to think that Joseph was married to somebody else? That wife died? Sure. I mean, people died very young back then, so very possible. Probably the most reasonable though answer to that was that well, really the answer, it really wouldn't matter, right? Because ultimately we know that Mary maintained her virginity. Jesus was her only son. But also we have to understand the context of what it means to say brothers and sisters in a first century Jewish culture. When we talk about the familial roots of the culture of the of Hebrews and Jews, it's kind of a deep familial root that even like cousins would be considered to be brothers. So when we hear the word brother, sister, that could apply not only to your biological brothers and sisters, but also even extended to your family of cousins. And so, for instance, some of Jesus' disciples, right? James the Lesser, son of Alphaeus, Jude, they were actually cousins of Jesus. And they would have been called his brothers, but they were actually biologically cousins. So you can hold either position, really. But you have to maintain that Mary still was a virgin before, during, after the birth of Jesus.
And another thing, okay, I might see if I can say this, I'm getting confused. When Jesus was on the cross, he said to John, behold your mother, and then to Mary, behold your son.
Yeah.
The idea being that John would take care of Mary.
Yes.
Now, Jesus didn't say to Mary, "Well, go out and find another husband." Because now,
Right.
Mary, being of Jewish faith, would be expected to get married again, right?
No, not necessarily. Widows were in order, a class of people in the time of Jesus too. And so just because Joseph died, and Joseph did die before Jesus even started his ministry, that didn't mean that she automatically had to get married. All that was required is that there would be someone to provide for her. So even in the instance of someone of a widow, the thought would be that the children that were produced from that marriage would take care of the mother. But since Jesus was dying, and nobody else was there except for John. He gave John his mother to take care of her, just as he would have done as her son, natural son. But also there's a greater significance that John being an apostle and a bishop, representing the church, Jesus was giving Mary to the church fully. And the entire church was called then to provide for her in her natural life. Which, for all intents and purposes, and the historical record shows they did.
So the basic assumption is that when the Bible talks about the brothers and sisters of Jesus, they're really talking about the cousins.
Yeah.
Extended family.
Extended family. I think that's, from a cultural perspective, what we understand about the Jewish culture at the time, that makes more sense. It's not to say that Joseph could have been a widower, maybe he was, but we have no evidence of that. Right. I mean, because if they actually were like step brothers or half brothers and half sisters of Jesus, they probably been named too at some point.
It probably
Would have been named
Named.
either in scripture or some
Named,
other
right.
reference, right? But we have no reference, and not only that, but like even traveling from Nazareth to Bethlehem. Well, in order to be recorded, you would think Joseph would have brought his other children with him to be recorded.
You know, it's funny, when we were in Turkey, Cappadocia,
Mhm.
and there were lots of little, not buildings, but they carved rooms out of,
Yeah, yeah,
and inside were paintings. And there were some paintings of Mary on the donkey, but Joseph had a other kid with him.
yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, who
I mean,
knows?
that's what they painted.
Right, right. Because I mean, that could have been a belief, right? It could be a thought. And again, you can hold that. But we're not, I mean, scripturally speaking, though, we're not told he brought any other children. It's not that they said that Mary, it said Mary, Joseph, Mary is betrothed is with child in Bethlehem. It didn't say anything about anyone else, so. Or not only that, but also like when, let's say Jesus got lost in the temple. Now, the old children could have been older at that point, so they could have been out of the household by then. But there's no reference to anyone else at that point. But I think you can hold either position. What you have to believe, to call yourself Catholic, is that Mary was a virgin before, during, and after the
And
birth
I
of
mean,
Jesus.
That's not in the Bible, though,
What's that?
that she was a virgin forever. Is that in the Bible?
Well,
Or-
I mean, it's every time she's referred to as the mother or the virgin.
In the Bible, they call her the virgin.
Well, it's okay, let's put it this way. In the New Testament, it's not explicitly said. But in the Old Testament, it actually is foreshadowed,
Okay.
right?
Mhm.
So we have like instances of, let's say, the Ark of the Covenant that remains undefiled, that any man that touches the ark would die. You have a passage in the Song of Songs that talks about the locked garden that no one can enter or get out of, only God. And that's also kind of a prototype of Mary, right? So we have this understanding that she would maintain been immaculate and inviolate, because also philosophically it makes sense, because once God uses
Yeah,
her for that purpose, well, no one else would be worthy to do anything else.
yeah.
But also too, I mean, it's important, I mean, there was ways also of checking for virginity back then that still remain today. And they would have, what's interesting, they would have seen that even after her birth. After the birth of Jesus. That her virginity was still intact.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think it's an interesting discussion. Yeah. Great, any other questions, comments, concerns, heresies?
Are you on a time?
No, I'm good. If we need to leave, feel free, but I mean, if you have any questions, yeah.
Are you sent out an email, before we go, did you send out an email about meeting electio for December 18th at the RCIA?
I did a while back, but I think we got it filled.
You got it, Phil?
Yeah.
I've been reading about enthronement of the Sacred Heart at
Oh, yeah.
home. And trying to study up and see if, that would be something good for us to do.
Sure.
And I've seen, hey,
I
it's you,
think I said-
thank you for coming. I've seen a couple other places where they have the Sacred Heart, and then they also have Immaculate Heart of Mary in the same.
Yeah,
Is that, I guess one thing is, would that be the thing to do, or do you have any other recommendations, resources on how I might prepare for something like that?
yeah, I mean, if I recall, I've only done it once, and it was at, it was in, you can do it through a prayer service, or you can do it through a mass. Also, you don't necessarily have a priest do it. I think you have to have a priest bless it, but
Yeah,
otherwise the rite can be done by anybody, there's a head household.
yeah,
But yeah, I mean, there's kind of a nice continuity between the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and we even see that liturgically in the fact that when we celebrate the solemnity of the Sacred Heart, when the very next day, what do we celebrate? The Immaculate Heart of Mary. And as a matter of fact, every first Friday and every first Saturday always kind of corresponds with that celebration.
mhm,
And there's even an indulgence that is associated with going to mass on those first Fridays or first Saturdays. So I think there's a great, it showed that beautiful connection of the new Adam, new Eve, and the hearts being combined, but you don't necessarily have to do it that way either.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's what I've seen.
yeah,
Well, the text that I've read hasn't said a whole lot about that, but then I've seen displays and they're always
Yep.
there together. so-
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, there are rights for both.
Mhm.
So
Uh-huh.
you could do one like on Friday, then another one on Saturday. Maybe that could be nice, continuity. But yeah, it's kind of up to, yeah, that's one thing about devotions. I mean, they're not obligatory, so you want to do one or the other or both.
Both,
It's up to you, right? Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
We haven't been receiving the precious blood for a couple of years now. I'm always wondering, at least in our archdiocese, I
Right.
should say.
Right.
Are we missing anything by not receiving the precious blood?
You receive the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ in both species. So if you receive just the body, you're receiving both. If you receive just the blood, you're receiving both. And there's kind of two schools. I mean, so I will share that there was a liturgy committee meeting last night, and I think the decision was made that the precious blood will be coming back during Advent. A lot of that depends on ministers. I think we're kind of short right now, so there's gonna be next few weeks. I think there's gonna be kind of a movement to try and see how many we have, if we need more. But I think the plan is by the third Sunday, we're planning to have it back. That's if everything goes the way they want to.
Mhm.
My personal opinion is, even though canon law states that every Catholic has the right to both species. Growing up, we only had one, and we only had both on like special occasions. So like, we never had it every Sunday. It was like Christmas, Easter, maybe for your wedding, for confirmation, First Holy Communion. Those would be the times we have it. I think there was a beauty in that kind of added to the solemnity of the day. So my opinion is a little different on canon law states. Canon law states it, so everyone has the right to it, but if it were me, I'd be like, let's just bring it out for special occasions.
Right.
Because the only one that really is required to actually receive those species is the priest.
Right. Yeah, when I sometimes attend at the oratory, we don't get precious blood.
Right,
there ever.
right, at all, right, yeah, exactly, yeah,
So-
right. So I don't know, I think there's different schools of thought on that, and a lot of that just depends on the kind of the preference of the pastor. I think, of course, the reason we haven't is not necessarily been because of COVID, it's just been more, well, it's been both and. There's been an issue of ministers, but then there's been a question of, well, what do we do if there's excess blood?
Mhm.
Because it has to be consumed, and who has to consume that? Well, if it's not a lay minister, it's the priest.
Mhm.
So do we want to give the priest sick? Whatever. Personally, I don't believe it. But that's kind of the question. So now that things are kind of getting back to normal, I think that's been kind of settled. And so now we have to figure out, do we have enough ministers to actually do it?
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Well, great news.
Yeah.
Glad to hear that.
All right.
Faith Kramer's on it.
She is.
Oh, yeah, okay.
She's on top of it.
She really went, and she thought she had enough, but maybe not just for one, one mask.
Yeah, I mean, we have enough fun the weekend, but the thing is like. You have to go and rotate through.
Yeah,
And so like,
right.
you have seen people do it every weekend. It's like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I know I'm not going back to being a minister. I have a problem with my knee and I don't wanna be hobbling up,
Yeah, I get it.
hold on to the.
Yeah,
thing,
sure.
hold
I
it
agree.
down.
Yeah, I mean, we might put some feelers out here in the next, I mean, I know we have like ministry days but I think that's been more for people who are already ministers.
Mhm.
I'm not sure if we do like I don't remember, I mean, I don't think since I've been here, we've actually had like a call for new people.
I don't know. No, I think it was more, let's review what we're
Right.
supposed to be doing.
Right. So I don't know if or how or when that happens.
I don't remember now when we started. I know growing up, we never had both.
Right, yeah, I mean, for
I
me,
don't-
it seemed like
I don't remember when. we
I went away
started.
for college and I started like, working and I came back one year and it seemed like everyone was doing it. I was like, oh, okay.
I don't remember,
And they had to be like maybe, I don't know, I mean.
but I don't
maybe
remember doing it
2000s.
on special occasions either.
See, I mean, we always had it for like confirmation,
And I
Christmas,
don't- I
Easter.
don't remember that at all.
yeah, we did that when I was younger, but a lot of it also depends on parish. I mean, some parishes had the precious blood for everybody earlier.
Mhm.
I think our pastor was more kind of the traditional route and said, well, let's just reserve it for these occasions.
I really
So,
don't remember it, but
Yeah,
I don't remember a lot.
I don't know. It had to be somewhere in the 2000s, that's all I know. But I'm not sure exactly when either. Yeah,
No, but I gotta go.
all right, thanks for coming, Joyce.
Thanks.
I hated to think you were alone.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, I don't know, last week was kind of like,
Was that the very first time somebody came?
no.
Okay.
I'd say there's about once or twice a year, I come down here, it's like, hey, well,
Okay.
I have the night off now.
Thanks.
Good.
Bye.
Bye, Joyce.
Mike, got anything else or we're good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Oh, you're great.
Yeah.
Everybody have a good night. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you soon.